Hello, welcome to day 3 of the Diponegoro University Summer Course 2021. Today we will be discussing about climate changes, food and nutrition security in the context of child nutrition. My name is Aryanie Amellina from UNICEF Indonesia, Environment and Climate Action Specialist, and I have a background of experience in climate action policy and greenhouse gas emissions monitoring, measurement, reporting and verification, climate resilience and child-focused policies. Today's class session will be divided into 4 topics. We'll start with a little bit of background understanding of climate change and why this is relevant. Then we'll go deeper into the relationship between climate change and nutrition, how they affect each other, and how this relationship affects the achievement of global and national goals as well as commitments. And then we will speak about what needs to be done and the role of the medical associations and medical societies. So let's start from the basic. What is climate change? A definition is provided by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, as a change in the state of the climate that can be identified by changes in the mean or the variability of its properties that persist for an extended period. The IPCC is an intergovernmental body of the United Nations mandated to provide objective scientific information that are relevant to understanding human-induced climate change. In addition to the definition by IPCC, the UNFCCC, the Climate Change Convention of the United Nations, emphasized on climatic change and the atmosphere's composition in its definition. Here on the screen, we see the mentioning of direct versus indirect contribution of human activities, whether human activities contribute to climate change or not, which is something that was debated for a long time. The contribution of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, that is CO2, CH4, and the other gases, was debated by climate change skeptics in the past. But science has provided increasingly strong evidence that human activity is indeed a major contributor to climate change. In 2021, the IPCC report put this debate to an end. It stated that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land, and thereby contributing to climate change that is happening right now. Now that we know that climate change is happening and human activity is a major contributor to it, why do we need to be concerned? Why do we need to act? Let's talk about the biggest impacts of climate change. One of the biggest impacts is the major increases in extreme weather events, including drought, wildfires, extreme temperature events, floodings, and heavy precipitation that we have observed on the ground. A UNDRR report, The Human Cost of Disasters 2000 to 2019, stated that the number of major floods that occurred in the world has more than doubled in the last years. In addition to that, climate-related disasters have affected as many as 3.9 billion people and caused more than 500,000 deaths within those 20 years. These major floods, along with other climate-related disasters like drought and storms, lead to many different social impacts. For instance, people are forced to move, people are displaced, people lose their livelihoods, lose their families, and lose their connection to their worlds. That's only from droughts, floods, and storms. The same impact to the humans around the world are also seen from wildfires that are happening in Australia, in Europe, and North America. Wildfires also bring destruction to the biodiversity and natural resources that we as humans depend upon for foods and also for a healthy environment. We also see in different parts of the world intense tropical cyclones that leads to major economic loss and lives loss of lives, as well as extreme heat waves that harm people and also other living organisms. These extreme events have a lot of social impacts, including the loss of access to foods. It is estimated that more than 800 million people are undernourished around the world. People lost their ability to access foods, or food availability is also disrupted due to extreme events. In the long run, these extremes and increased risk from climate changes threaten to reverse the food security gains that we have achieved throughout the years. And this is why you as health and nutritional professionals need to understand better about climate changes, especially its relationship with the food system, food security, and nutrition. Climate change and nutrition affect each other. They have a so-called bidirectional relationship. Climate changes puts an additional risk to the nutrition goals that the world strive to realize. And on the other hand, food security, the mission to achieve food security also puts some burden to the climate and to the environment. Climate change is happening in a world that is still facing triple burden of malnutrition, stunting, wasting, and overweight. More than 140 million people in the world are stunted, more than 40 million people are wasted, and more than 30 million are overweight. Indonesia is not an exception. Around 7 million children under 5 are stunted, 2 million are wasted, and more than 1 million, nearly 2 million, are overweight. The situation of stunting in Indonesia, where 1 in 3 children between 0 to 59 months old are stunted, are considered severe and high in magnitude by the WHO. These children who lack adequate nutrition will be more likely to face even more severe impacts from climate changes and environmental degradation, more than their peers who are not stunted. Furthermore, stunting is irreversible and is caused by poor nutrition or repeated infections during the first 1,000 days of their lives. It can have a long-lasting effect throughout a child's life, as well climate change will exacerbate their stunting and their condition throughout their life. The world is also facing other types of malnutrition, such as micronutrient deficiency. As many as 2 billion people in the world are suffering from micronutrient deficiency, and this is not only particular to certain regions of the world. This is detrimental for children because micronutrients, including vitamins and minerals, are necessary for the healthy growth and development of the child. It affects not only their current lives, but also affects their opportunity to grow physically and also cognitively throughout their lifetime. The lack of micronutrients can affect the strength of children and also their survivability in a changing world. The state of micronutrient deficiency in Indonesia, particularly anemia in pregnant women and children, are quite staggering. You see that in 2016, more than 50% of women are suffering from anemia, and that thankfully have decreased in the more recent years. What are the long-term effects of the micronutrient deficiency? It affects both pregnant women, mothers, and children. It affects their survivability, their physical development currently and throughout their future, cognitive development that affects the potential to achieve well in the academic field, that in turn provides them a better opportunity at getting jobs and being productive in the society, and eventually to protect themselves, to sustain themselves and their families in the future. What caused this challenge? What are the causes of malnutrition? Well, they are multidimensional and interconnected. If we try to group them, we'll see three groups of food, care and feeding, and health. These are all interconnected. Insufficient access to nutritious foods or the unaffordability of foods directly cause poor nutritional status. Malnutrition can also occur if caregivers do not provide adequate care and time for the young children, especially to feed them with nutritious foods and meals. The environment in which children and their caregivers live also play a great role in ensuring good nutrition. If the health and environment is poor, it risks absorption of food and nutrition in the child's body. Climate change will put a risk to the access of foods, availability to provide good care, and cause environmental degradation that harms children in the long run, particularly during the development stage that is critical. For example, in the health pillar, children who are living in contaminated areas or poisoned by exposure to heavy metals such as mercury or lead that contaminate their living spaces, their settlements, will be at risk of not growing optimally, even if they are fed with nutritious foods and cared for by their families. So these three causes are interconnected and each of them plays a big role in child nutrition. And this is why climate change is a big risk to child nutritional status and child's development. Just like the three pillars under nutrition affect each other, climate change and nutrition also affect each other. Climate change has effects on food supply chains, food environments, environmental situation, and consumer behaviors that are influenced by the chosen diets of the consumers. Climatic changes, including extreme events and increases in ambient temperature that we discussed earlier, will directly influence the food system by leading to the failed harvest, destruction of the crop fields, and declines in the yields of crops, agroforestry products, and others. This will impact the societies. Particularly, the greatest burden of the intensified impact of climate change will fall upon the malnutrition and nutritional outcomes of vulnerable groups, including children, adolescents, and women. There will be changes in food quality, diversity, and prices. Prices could be volatile due to the changes in the crops harvesting schedule and the failure to harvest. The climate change will also disrupt the health system and nutrition and food system services that adds the risk of environment health decline. On the other hand, behaviors related to nutrition and the operation of food systems feed back into the environment and cause climate change. The act of consuming food itself already contributes to the GHG emissions from agriculture and food system, particularly industrial food system. In addition to that, overproduction of foods, overconsumption, and food waste adds on to the burden to the environment by increasing the GHG emissions on top of the agriculture emissions, and take a toll on the environment by using heavily water, soil, and water, and the loss of diversity in the agricultural lands. And these changes will, in turn and in the long run, increase climate change impact. Climate change will also affect the type, amount, and the nutritional quality of the food that can be produced. It is possible that some crops and food items are not able to grow in the changed climate unless there is some innovation and technology that are applied to make them more resilient. Let's go deeper into each of the aspects or the pillar. from the food aspect, how do climate change affect food and nutrition security? Climate change affects food security and food availability because it includes extreme events that create volatility of food security, including access to safe, affordable, and sufficient food. You will see in this slide not an exhaustive list of the climate-related changes and the potential impact on nutrition. As we have discussed, climate hazards will affect the agricultural sector and the food quality, prices, and quality. In addition to that, climate-induced migration to urban cities or urban centers can create changes in the diets into a more unhealthy diets that leads to obesity and overweight. When we speak about climate change that influence the environmental quality and the change of biodiversity in the world, this will increase the risk of having unsafe foods, and also it will risk the variety of the foods that we can get and the diet or the food composition that we take each day. This leads to the risk of the homogeneous diets that are not nutritionally rich, that could in turn be considered micronutrient deficiencies. When we speak about climate-related disasters that induce emergency situations, we also speak about food aid. And the more climate-induced disasters happen, the more frequent people will have to rely on food aid. And if these food aids are not nutritionally balanced, or the availability and access are low, there will be an increased risk of undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies among people, especially children that are more vulnerable. The IPCC has also indicated that the changes in temperature and precipitation are projected to increase the global food price by between 3 to 80%. And the same panel, the IPCC, also stated there is a high to very high confidence that climate changes will lead to greater risk to health, including increased risk of undernutrition. Let's move on to how climate change can affect food and nutrition security from the care or feeding pillar. Climate change affects care and feeding, particularly by inducing extreme events and long-term changes that change life situations of children and their families, changes that force maternal and child care practices, particularly child feeding. Again, this list is not exhaustive, but you can imagine, or this list gives you an illustration of how climate change affects care. For example, climate change will cause extreme damages, and in some cases, the complete losses of homes, that in some parts of the world lead to an uncertainty whether they will ever have a home in settlements again or not. In the events of these disasters, mothers, children, and caregivers are forced to migrate. Migrants often have uncertain lives, uncertain livelihoods, and uncertain places of living. And migrants have some additional burdens to work in many cases, or other activities that are necessary for their survival, that in many cases prevents them from caring for their child as often or as long as they want. This can lead to an inconsistency in the child's feeding habit. For example, families could rely on quick and cheap ultra-processed foods that leads to both micronutrient deficiencies and overweight or obesity. They may also be cared for by other people, or in more extreme or more worst cases, children could be forced to work. and they will have less time to take care of themselves, to eat properly, and this puts them at risk of being under malnutrition status. Climate-related disasters can also cause the loss of parents' lives in many cases, that will leave children that are still growing to the care of other people, or that are sometimes even not the case. They could be taken care of by societies or by their governments, and these can both negatively impact their nutritional intake and access to foods. The third pillar, how climate change affects environmental health. Again, this list is not exhaustive, but climate change, as we have spoken, can deteriorate environmental health quality that will jeopardize children's nutritional intake. Climate change is known, or climate change is stated by climate science and health science to have the potential to increase transmission of vector-borne and waterborne diseases that, if reaching children, can lead to undernutrition and micronutrient deficiencies due to low nutrient absorption in the children's bodies. Climate change will also affect the social and environmental determinants of health: clean air, safe drinking water, secure shelters and settlements. These disasters and hazards affect also the public systems and services and facilities for the basic needs like water and health care, that will put children at the risk of higher risk of disease outbreaks and losing their access to health care. The lack of response and appropriate treatment for children with poor nutrition will be a longer impact for these children, exacerbated by climate change that disrupts the basic systems and services. As a result, children who are not in a malnutrition status before, children that are not stunted, wasted, or overweight, can be stunted or overweight or wasted because of the loss of these services and disruption of systems. Climate variability, climate extremes, climate change are therefore, through our analysis, clearly eroding and reversing progress in ending child hunger and malnutrition that the whole world is striving to achieve. And if we go back to the bidirectional figure earlier, we'll see that this situation can be further intensified by climate change itself. And how is this possible? Let's take a look at the relationship of food systems and climate change through the other direction. Food and nutrition affects climate change similar to the previous slides through the food systems and agriculture sector. Agriculture sector emits greenhouse gases, and in fact, industrial food systems, if we take into consideration the whole supply chain, not only the harvesting and production, but also packaging, transportation, and other supply chain activities, these are a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions globally. Second, pollution and depletion of resources. The heavy use of natural resources due to agricultural production is reducing the quality of environment and health that are impacting child's nutritional intake. Third point is food waste. Overproduction, overconsumption of food, and food waste emits greenhouse gases that cause climate change. Let's take a look at this in more detail. According to Vermeulen et al., industrial food systems, especially the agriculture sector, are responsible for more than 30% of global GHGs. This is huge. Combined with the other food chain, supply chain components, the industrial food system is estimated to contribute to 50% of all the global greenhouse gas emissions. This includes all of the process from growing, packaging, consumption, and food disposal. This finding and numbers are aligned with the findings of the IPCC. Second, natural resources depletion and environmental pollution. That is also having a bidirectional relationship with food security. Food systems, agricultural production and activities creates pollution to the soil, to the water, through the use of chemicals and pesticides. Poor waste management, unsustainable use of land and natural resources, including deforestation, creates air pollution and also creates the loss of biodiversity that are detrimental to the sustainability of the earth to provide foods more sustainably for the years to come. It also creates danger to the health and safety of the environment for children and risk their developments. In addition to that, the poor quality of the environment that children are living in, as mentioned before, reduce the nutritional intake of children and becomes a barrier for growth to the children. Globally, food production level measures, including land use change and agricultural emissions, have been a constant topic in the climate change issues, particularly the forest fires and also rapid deforestation that is happening to different countries around the world, including Indonesia. This depletion of forest and natural resources is a double-edged sword because their loss means the decrease in potentially food production, and on the other hand, it also brings other environmental health risk to everyone that lives surrounding the area and even people who are living in other countries, as it is transported as transboundary air pollution. The greenhouse gases that is increased by the forest fires increase the overall greenhouse gas emissions of the country, making it more at risk of not achieving its global climate change goals. Food waste. Food waste contributes to GHG emissions directly if they are dumped into landfills without being separated. Food waste that are dumped in landfills create methane or CH4 emissions that are very harmful to the atmosphere, even more harmful than carbon dioxide. Indirect contribution of emissions in the production, distribution, and refrigeration of the wasted food also contributes to GHG emissions from the food sector. One study shows that 550 million cans of infant formula are dumped in landfills each year. These are not treated appropriately, not separated, and therefore creates a burden to the environmental capacity to naturally process waste. We see landfills are getting fuller and fuller every year, and we see instances of landfill explosion or slides that are harming people around the place and also children that are working as scavengers or in the informal sectors. On the other hand, reducing food loss and waste is an important issue towards sustainable and healthy diets. Reducing food loss and waste can reduce emissions by more than almost 2 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year, and combined with addressing land use change and agricultural emissions, the food waste prevention can contribute to about 20% of the mitigation actions needed in 2050 to deliver the achievement of the global climate change goal. Why is identifying that important? This is because almost every nation in the world have uh, their own national goals and commitments to combat malnutrition and climate change through mitigation and adaptation of climate change. Let's take a look at these commitments in more detail. Climate change is a threat to the achievement of global nutritional goals. You will see here the picture of a SDG, or Sustainable Development Goal 2, Zero Hunger, that is end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. If we don't address the climate change challenges on food systems and nutrition adequately, we will be at a high risk of not meeting this goal. We also have nationally different nutrition goals that are set in the laws, regulations, and action plans of the government. We have the Indonesian Law number 18, 2012 on food. We have long-term, medium-term development plans where wasting and stunting are national development indicators. We have national strategies, strategic policy for food and nutrition, and food and nutrition action plan that are already determined for the benefit of achieving the country level nutrition goals to end malnutrition. As mentioned before, if climate change happen more and without the strengthening of the food systems and food security, children in the long run will be the victims and also the most impacted societies, communities from malnutrition induced by climate change. But it is important to realize that children is not the only affected communities. The society as a whole will also be impacted. The second edge of the sword is the threats to the achievement of climate change goals. SDG 13 is a commitment of the world to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. As a translation of this global commitment, each country developed its own nationally determined contributions submitted to the UNFCCC, and also national development plans that are aligned with those nationally determined contributions. These contributions are developed under international conventions such as the Paris Agreement under the UNFCCC, national adaptation plans, and climate resilience policy, and also Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. This last framework of disaster risk reduction is important because climate-induced disasters are especially important to be addressed, and disaster risk management is something that children will benefit from in the long run to ensure their survivability. Indonesia's nationally determined contributions to climate change efforts include promoting climate resilience in food, water, and energy, which means that Indonesia recognizes the importance of fulfilling the needs of the growing young population for food, water, and energy, and this means food security as well. Indonesia also mentioned that it will improve its management of natural resources to enhance climate resilience and sustainable agriculture. This needs to be achieved through collaboration with different stakeholders and education and awareness from all stakeholders, including the medical society. Last but not least, the climate crisis threats the realization of children's rights within the Convention of the Rights of the Child of the CRC, which includes the rights to nutrition and the rights to a safe and clean environment. The climate crisis is a child rights crisis. Now we have discussed extensively about climate change, nutrition, the bidirectional relationship, and how these challenges will give a high risk for children to achieve the nutritional status that they need. So now what needs to be done? What are the systemic changes and the role of societies in addressing this issue? First, let's talk about the food systems. We need to transform the food systems into a climate-resilient food systems. It not only needs to transform to provide healthy diets for children, but should also incorporate a climate environment dimension, including natural resources, management, climate change, ecosystem services, and natural disasters. Policies related to food systems and nutrition and environment needs to be strengthened and address the interrelated nature of health, nutrition, and environment. Food systems are essential to delivering healthy, affordable, and sustainable diets. And here in the Innocenti framework on food systems for children and adolescents show the different pillars and components to the system. Nutritional needs of children and adolescents, both of present and for future generations, need to be prioritized along with ensuring the climate changes and environmental changes that influence them are well controlled and well taken care of. The UNICEF and GAIN framework here includes biophysical and environment drivers that needs to be transformed to incorporate a more detailed climate and environment dimension so that the behaviors and external food environments and the other components of the food systems are strengthened to ensure that the diets and the food nutritional qualities are fulfilled. Here we need the innovation and technological drivers as well, where the private sector engagement needs to be incorporated, and private sector, including farmers, needs to be sensitized on the climate change aspects of the food production. As such, climate resilient food systems do not only mean nutrition strategy and climate and environment strategy, but they both should be incorporated to one another. Policies and strategies need to be strengthened to incorporate both aspects to each other. So we'll have specific actions for nutrition or nutrition policies that consider environment and climate. And on the other hand, we have nutrition-sensitive strategies for other fields like clean water and sanitation strategies, agriculture strategies, education, healthcare, support for resilience, and social protection. Nutrition strategy should incorporate a climate dimension, environment dimension through adaptation and mitigation efforts. Here you will see some additional inputs that needs to be considered to strengthen these strategies. On the other hand, nutrition-sensitive strategies will also need to be strengthened by including these different points of efficient production, reducing GHG emissions of food production, quality of food, aid in disasters and climate disaster emergencies, and incorporate sustainability into different education programs, including nutrition education. Agriculture and the food system are key to global climate change responses. So combining supply side actions such as these and demand side interventions such as the modification of food choices and the reduction of loss of food and the food waste will enhance the food system's overall resilience and enhance the children's resilience to climate change from a health and nutrition aspect. Which brings us to the third point. We cannot address climate change and nutrition and ensure that children are well nourished if we don't address the issue of child vulnerability. Children are more vulnerable to adults for many reasons, and a child who lacks adequate access to services, basic services, will be more vulnerable to changes, including climate change. They also need to be more resilient to disasters by getting disaster risk management education to be less vulnerable and to be more resilient to climate and environmental shocks and stresses. Therefore, in order to ensure our nutritional goals are fulfilled within the changing climate, we need to provide children with access to these basic services. Children who do not have adequate access to health and nutrition facilities and services will be entering a vicious circle that continuously worsens the health and nutrition outcomes for themselves. Access to health and nutrition improves their resilience, for example, by providing strong health systems that are resilient to climate, ready to address shocks that they are facing from climate change and other natural disasters. Through this increased resilience, children will have a better chance of surviving and intake better quality nutrition and grow without nutritional barriers. In addition to that, education, social protection, and financial inclusion are other basic services that are crucial to reduce child vulnerability. So now we'll see child development and child development issues are all interrelated, and we should address them in an integrated manner. The next point is the diets itself, the nutritional diets that children have. There are more than 2 billion children in the world, and to feed them and while ensuring they have healthy diets and nutrition, we need a globally coordinated drive across stakeholders, public and private sectors, including the Nutrition Society and Health Society, to create sustainable and climate-friendly nutrition system, food system, and climate-friendly agriculture. Because as we saw earlier, agricultural sector is a major contributor to climate change and also a major contributor to the availability of foods and food security that affect nutrition. Now, what can we do to ensure this? Investment plans are required for governments, for policymakers, but also for private sectors, farmers, food cooperatives, small companies, small producers. They need to be aware of the climate change risk and their vulnerabilities and what the climate hazards are, and get more investments and more education in how to address them from an agricultural perspective. There needs to be an increased investment in climate resilient technologies, the crops, seeds, irrigation technologies. We need more sustainable agricultural practices, as we discussed, those that are not depleting the natural resources. We need to invest in more healthy foods. We need to invest in more vegetables, more fruits, improve the production efficiency, and avoid the food loss and food waste. We also need to invest in community inclusion. We need to work together with farmers, with communities, and from the nutrition perspective, from the nutrition professionals that educate caregivers and children into what the nutritions they need are. In this case, we need to educate the need for diversifying the food system and adopting a sustainable and healthy diets so that children have the nutrition that they need without bringing too much burden into the environment and causing an even more severe climate changes. What do we mean by sustainable healthy diets? This is one of the recommendations from the FAO and the WHO called the Sustainable Healthy Diets Guiding Principles. Here you will see 16 principles that are divided into health group, the quality of foods, and the second one is the environmental sustainability, and the last one is the socio-cultural aspects. From the health perspective, you will see here that a sustainable healthy diets start early from breastfeeding. They are minimally processed, so ultra-processed foods are discouraged. The diets include grains and plants, They include animal protein at a moderate amount and small amount of red meat, because red meat emits a higher amount of greenhouse gas emissions compared to other food products. Include safe water, reduce the risk of diseases. So the diets should be healthy in the sense that it reduces the risk of diet-related non-communicable diseases and ensure health of the general population. The diet needs to be adequate, not too much, not lacking. It is adequate in energy and nutrients for growth and to be active for children and people across their life cycle. It must be free from contaminants, of course, and therefore we need a healthy environment. We cannot have foods that are contaminated by toxins, by pathogens, and by heavy metals, for example, and in our diets. Otherwise, it will not be a healthy diet. From the environmental perspective, moving on, we see here that the diets should be low carbon. It maintains or reduces GHG emissions, it wisely uses resources, and it also limits the use of nitrogen and phosphorus application in the agricultural process. The sustainable and healthy diet preserves biodiversity, including crops biodiversity. It takes natural resources only as much as it needs, avoid overfishing and other unsustainable practices. It also reduced the amount of waste from plastic, and of course reducing or eliminating food loss and waste. This will be helped by education on feeding or for caregivers, and also for children to be more sensitive to the choices they make on eating, on consuming foods, to make them more mindful of their selection. Sociocultural wise, we see here that sustainable healthy diets respect gender equity, avoid exploitation of genders, and for example, women should not be negatively impacted by agricultural practices because they are unfairly spending time for the practices and also for the lives that they maintain for their families. Sustainable and healthy diets also respect the local circumstances, respect local culture, respect local people, local farmers, and includes local wisdom and also agricultural practices, and values the local foods. Finally, it must be desirable in the sense that it taste good and they are accessible. Then the next question is, what food do we have then? What food do we have on the table that is sustainable and healthy? This is a quest for sustainable and healthy diets composition that is currently being investigated by different types of agencies. For example, here you will see from the conventional diet guidance. We are striving towards a more universal, sustainable, and healthy diets here as proposed by Lancet or Willett et al. 2019, where we have legumes and nuts dominating the food composition, as also vegetables and fruits. Here we see a lot of vegetables and fruits intake for children and for people to ensure they have a healthy diet. We also have here an increased amount of legumes and nuts that is nutritious for children, for people, and that reduce the intake of carbohydrates to make it more balanced, to ensure they have the micronutrients that children need. But the universal sustainable healthy diets may not be applicable to Indonesia or to other countries, as they have different cultures and values of food. This is why different countries and societies cultures are on the quest for the local sustainable healthy diets. Here in Indonesia, in the context of Indonesia, we have a desirable dietary pattern called Pola Pangan Harapan that was established by the Ministry of Agriculture, with balanced diet called Isi Piringku, here promoted by the Ministry of Health, where we see a large portion of the plate, 1/3 of the plate is filled with veggies, 1/3 is by carbohydrates, and the the rest of the 1/3 are combined for protein and the fruits. Here we also see the health markers, health promotion here: hand washing, physical activity, drinking 8 glasses of water per day, maintaining body weight, and maintaining blood sugar levels. However, this local guidance of diet may not be equal for children and adults. So for example, for children, they may need a lot of intake of nutrition from different types of foods to grow and to ensure their cognitive developments. But once children grow into adults or adolescent, they can have different types of nutritional needs, and therefore adults can shift their diets and also food intake behaviors, and there they can consider different food products that have less impact on the environment and also greenhouse gases. The fastest example is red meat that we have seen in the previous sustainable healthy diet graph before. Local sustainable and healthy diets also need to be put in place in the context of food aid during emergency. Food aid needs to be high in nutrition and also adequate and accessible. There's a lot of gaps in the research and knowledge of local sustainable healthy diets, in particular the impact of food products in the context of Indonesia, and therefore the climate change impact from those diets from the food agriculture, food system, and consumption perspective. And this is something that the medical society and nutrition professionals can fill the gap. That's one of the roles that the communities can play: youth, health professionals, and academic societies. Research on guidance need to be strengthened. We need to understand better the climate change's impact on food security in Indonesia as well. There's a lot of research and scientific exercises happening in Indonesia right now that you can take a look and learn better how it will impact nutritional status. Young people or youth should also be engaged in policy making, including in nutrition policies, as they are required, as their views are important, and it is a right of youth to express their views and provide inputs. Youth are also agents of change. They are the key players in promoting more sustainable, healthy diets and to advocate for changes in the food systems. Finally, young people, health professionals, academic societies, and every part of the society needs to be more aware of climate resilience, disaster resilience, and the context of nutrition and food systems in a changing climate. That is the end of today's session. I hope you have taken away with you a better understanding of the climate change, climate impact on nutrition and food security, and also how you can contribute to ensuring that all children have better nutrition and sustainable healthy diets for a better future. Nutrition for every child, safe and healthy environment for every child, and your contribution will impact every child.